Do I have to do that again? Welcome to Field Service in Focus. Today we're looking at the topic of the changing role of the field worker. So today I'm joined by Mark Brewer, who's one of my colleagues here at IFS, our VP of Service Industries. So Mark, you've been in the service industry quite a while, and obviously you've seen a lot of change. If we look more at the field worker themselves, you know, how has their role changed?
Yeah.
If you're going back 15 years from when you started off and they were a necessity, what kind of skills, what would they be doing, and how's that different to today?
Yeah, the whole philosophy is different, you know. Back then it was the problem fixer, if you will. It was the guy that you called up and came on site as a superhero to fix a problem. That's changed rather, you know, you could call that a very reactive model.
Okay.
Whereas a very passive model, you know, wait for who shouts loudest. Now it's much more proactive. Okay, even predictive, as we might explore later, to the point where now, you know, they're no longer seen as the problem fixer per se, but more evolves into this role of a trusted advisor, you know, that is adding value to the operation rather than just turning up and fixing, actually becoming an intrinsic part of a successful operation for the end customer.
So they might be saying, come in, they fix something, but they might make recommendations for how you could optimize that in the future. Or I guess, and one thing that, you know, I've seen talked about a lot is how they could upsell and sell other things. So maybe make a recommendation, you know, if they fix something, but they see that something else might be faulty or require a service, they could actually offer additional service.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you a real example. We've got a customer that's in the world of, they call it document solutions, essentially to you and I, you know, printers and copiers and so on.
Sure.
They went to a customer in a hotel customer in the reception area. The printer was failing, you know, quite frequently because it was observed by the engineer that that was really a 10,000 capacity per month printer. This hotel is now doing 30,000 capacity. So clearly they advised the client to swap out that unit. They arranged for that swap out of the unit.
Sure.
And that lessens the frequency of failure, but it also improves the outcome for the customer and actually overall lowers the cost of the operation because it's failing less frequently. So, you know, that's the type of value-added recommendation these people can make now.
I mean, it's really interesting how much we've seen the use of remote assistance and augmented reality grow. I was looking at some research that WBR did last year in Europe, where they interviewed different field service leaders. And one of the things that came out from their research was 60% of organizations already have AR or some sort of remote assistance within their businesses, and another 20% are planning to purchase this year. How are they using remote assistance and AR in their business?
Look, there's a couple of elements there though with remote, right? Yes, of course, you know, the AR assisted, you know, help is a big deal, and perhaps we'll touch on that again in a minute. But let's not forget, a lot of products today, in fact, the majority have IP, are connected. We call it smart connected products. I think, you know, I had a kitchen makeover a year ago and literally my refrigerator, my hob, my dishwasher, I'm not kidding, are all Wi-Fi connected, okay?
Oh, wow.
You know, I won't go into the pros and cons of that. We won't go into the pros and cons of that. But suffice to say, and hence we saw the chip shortage and the problems that caused about a year ago, right? So what? Well, all of a sudden, after the product leaves the factory gate, we continue to have visibility of it.
Okay.
And again, I say, so what? Well, we can now see not only how it's performing, but how it's being operated. And, you know, what features are being used or not used, which real great feedback in this infinity loop for the OEM, if you will. But also, it allows, you know, it allows us to then identify problems from the noise. So obviously there's a lot of data coming out of these machines, but we ultimately are using technology like AI for pattern matching or anomaly detection, if you will, to spot a voltage spike, to spot an overheating motor in a refrigerator, for example, or a pump. You know, even to spot in one of our customers that does property damage restoration, to spot a leak that's hidden and see that there's an impending, flood or potential moisture damage to the property. So, this is real. And the other technology goes hand in hand with remote is the smartphone. I'm looking for mine here. But this is ubiquitous. Particularly, let's take that Generation Z millennial, it's glued to these individuals, myself included. And it has become the go-to device for everything from booking a vacation to, ordering a pizza, if you will. So why, these guys or girls coming into the organization now, they're not expecting to, take phone calls from customers to find out, when I can book an appointment slot. They're expecting to see customers do that themselves on the phone. So again, when I'm on site and I need help, I just ask the expert.
One of the other things, and I think you mentioned a bit earlier, you mentioned subcontractor, and that made me think, one way to fill these gaps in the workforce, and we've got this aging workforce are leaving, one obvious thing for companies to do could be to take in more subcontractors. Do you think that's going to be an increasing trend? Do you think companies are increasingly going to look to subcontractors to fill the gap?
It's a really interesting question. I mean, we've seen this in other sectors. Probably people watching are familiar with the term the gig economy, for example. Grocery services, taxi services, and so on. I'm not saying that's the model that service will follow, but in truth, Zana, this is not new as well. A lot of service organisations already leverage that subcontractor or contingent workforce model. Again, I think it goes back to the previous question to a large degree. The success of the subcontractor model will largely depend on how well the organisation can empower those third parties, if you will. And knowledge management, again, could be key there, right? The beauty of the remote expert, of course, is the scalability of that remote expert. He's doing 30 now, not 3, if you will. And, supporting 30 subcontractors is now viable. What I think subcontractor really helps many organizations is elasticity, right? As in flexibility. We got a great customer in Canada. It's a part of Canada that, gets very cold and gets very hot, depending on the time of year. A bit like the UK.
But to more extremes.
Absolutely to more extremes. Now, they literally double their workforce in the colder months. Right? But they do that through the subcontractor model, the contingent workforce model. That sounds great and it sounds easy. It's not easy because all of a sudden you're going from 800 to 1600 in the colder months. So you really need strong tools to manage that sudden elasticity, and that's where some of the technologies like planning, schedule, and optimization really come into their own to observe the fact that we've got this increased demand, we've got this increased resource pool. So how do we now dynamically take advantage of this elastic workforce, if you will?
So would they give them different jobs? You talked then about the planning and scheduling. If I've got my more experienced workforce who are making up 50% of the workforce and I'm bringing in my contingent workforce, would I give them like lower skilled jobs?
Good question. There's a number of models. You tune the model depending on your desired outcome, right? So what's quite common is that you will service more remote rural locations with the remote workforce. You're not having people, in the Outer Hebrides, waiting for a problem to come about. But at the same time, of course, you want to do what customers call fair share as well, territory balancing, if you will. So one of the real nice features of technology today is that you can actually perform some simulations of potential scenarios before you commit to taking on subcontractors. With the greatest will, it would be a big mistake to put a contract with a subcontractor and then realise that actually the work isn't there that you were envisaging.
And you're committed to pay them.
Correct. There's a contract commitment, 12 months, perhaps something like that. So it's quite important to ensure that you're doing this contracting based on facts. Again, it sounds simple, but actually the ability to play out scenarios where you win a new contract, for example, in a location where you're not so well staffed or skilled today, and then be able to play out that scenario with a surety that you can actually see you can meet your service level commitment, perhaps 95%, with the existing workforce plus X number of additional subcontractors. Tools like that really give you confidence to make the subcontract investment.
Yeah. And I think I saw that talked about quite a lot after COVID, because obviously COVID had such a big impact on so many organisations in different ways. That whole what if scenario modelling kind of thing was, increasing interest, I think, to people.
Absolutely. And it comes back to that elasticity. That's what this affords you, the flexibility that it affords you. And again, coming back to your COVID example, now there was an initial spike after COVID of leveraging subcontractors. It's maybe tapered out a little bit more. But again, remembering another aspect or advantage of subcontractors is they over time become skilled and become attractive as potentially full-time equivalents as well.
So do you see that doing companies poaching the subcontractors of employees?
I probably wouldn't use the word poaching in that regard. It's more of a case, and I think this is an interesting point that we're heading to actually, the partnering. I don't see so much, the Uber model in service. It's been talked about, right?
Yeah.
Here's a job, who can do it? Sounds great. There's a little bit more to it than that, of course. So I see it more of partnering model where, you build some trusted relationships with partners that exhibit your brand, ambassador type mentality. And literally, when you give them the mobile app, for example, it's white labeled or OEM'd with your brand on there. Some of these subcontractors could be working for multiple different companies, but when they go to your customer, you want them to exhibit and to present themselves as a ambassador of your organization. That comes about with a more trusted advisor relationship.
So, that made me think when you talk about them being the face of your company, the brand, that brings up a really interesting question for me, because I think, when I talk to field service companies, they're starting to realise that it is the field worker that spends longer with the customer than anyone else in their company. And, they can spend lots of money on their, marketing and advertising to be customer focused. But actually, it's the behaviour of that field service engineer when they're on site that dictates the perception of you by the customer. Do you think, obviously customers are realising that. Do you think that's changing the way they are training field workers and the expectation they have of field workers?
Most definitely, and it's absolutely on point. What you're talking about there. Not only are these guys the most frequent face that are seen by their customers, but also, they ultimately become the trusted advisor or not, as the case may be. What is the end game here? It is all about the customer experience. Okay, so what comes before customer experience? The employee experience. And so to deliver that superior customer experience, you've got to have knowledgeable, dynamic, high morale workforce. So again, back to the training and the knowledge and the enablement capabilities, which you talked about, and the tools, by the way, which for the next generation are becoming much more prominent in how they appraise an organisation. I think you talked about sustainability in one of these features on a previous occasion. Again, that's becoming a prominent part of how attractive you are as an organisation to the next generation of field worker as well. So yes, they are the brand ambassador. They are ultimately, hopefully, the trusted advisor. But this is where, the rubber hits the road. Do they, to the customer, deliver that superior experience? And ultimately, if they do, that's where you get the utopia, as in both you as a service provider and the customer are focused on the very same thing, which is the outcome that the customer ultimately desires.
It's an interesting dichotomy, isn't it? Because as we use tech and we use AI more, we're actually making more efficient use of our workers, and we're probably sending them out less.
Right. It's a great point.
But if we're sending them out less as a service organisation, how do we prove our value to our customer? Because no longer are they seeing that technician that they like having a chat with. They're not seeing them anymore. How do they know that we're fixing things on their behalf if we're not in front of them?
Fantastic question, right? And a challenge. It's not an easy. There's not an easy silver bullet here. But what I would say is this. It's about education and the evolution of your relationship with your customer as well. Let me put it this way. In the past, and this is quite interesting, in the past, the end customer has judged the value of service based on how frequently they see the engineer and how successful they are at fixing the problem on the first visit. Yeah. That's been the historical gauge, if you will. Well, that's changing, and I think it's got to change, to be honest with you. As I said earlier, with the advent of connected products, we don't have to visit for everything anymore. We can do a lot remotely. At the same time, we can actually, and this is quite interesting, we can actually head off issues before the customer even knows there's an issue. We can see these anomalies being reported to us. We can remotely make some adjustments to the unit. More and more we can do this. Remote by default in one of our customers is the phrase of the day, if you will. And as a consequence, you will see them less. Yeah. So the gauge of value isn't or shouldn't be in the future, how often do I see the technician? That's actually a negative in some ways. The gauge should be, to what degree has my uptime improved? To what degree have my productivity improved? And to what degree am I getting a more stable outcome than I was in the past? That's the measure of success.
I suppose it's that data. So yeah, it's fine to say that, but unless you have that data at the fingertips and can put it in a format that your customer can comprehend, then you can't. And then this is something organisations really struggle with.
So we've got a customer, without naming them, we've got a customer in the transit, passenger transit systems. They're making effectively automated gates for metros and so forth. And I'm always blown away when I visit them, because one of the things they do is they provide real-time transparency, not only to their customer, but the actual paying public, me or you who use these services. We can actually go on and we can see the volume of journeys that day. We can see the number of breakages that day, how many times the gates have stopped, maybe the readers are not working, maybe the gate's stuck, whatever it is. And that's genuinely, truly real-time transparency. But what does it speak to? It speaks to partnership. And it speaks to ultimately not the measurement being how many times did the gate fail and how many times did you come to fix it, but actually what was the passenger experience ultimately, which is both what the customer's looking for, the service provider's trying to deliver, and therefore at the same time, the same objective.
And it's the outcome, it's where you started, it's about the outcome that the customer receives. Just looking, if you had to sum it up, are there any words of wisdom, like key things you would say to a service organisation about what they need to do to prepare for the changing role of the field worker?
Any initiative that you undertake goes back to the 4 principles always, right? It's people, process, data, and technology. And the level to which you push each of those levers will depend on your current state. We have something called the maturity matrix, 1 to 5. Where are you? First of all, establish where you are as an organization. Then you can set realistic expectations to the delta. And when you determine, can you be a 4? Could you be a world-class 5? Depends on where you are. You'll then know which of the levers, have you got the data? Have you got the people? Have you got the process? Have you got the tools? Let's go back. Data's worth just revisiting very quickly. Data, we talked about knowledge capture. Again, to scale your business and to take advantage of the contingent workforce, to take advantage of the remote expert model, you need good knowledge data, knowledge management tools to democratize and scale. So, words of wisdom, check yourself on the maturity matrix, determine where you could be versus where you are, and look at which of those 4 levers you need to pull.
Great summary, Mark. Thank you so much for your time today. It's been great talking to you.
Thanks, Susanna.